welcome everybody again. Welcome you to a conversation between two grumpy old men who somehow, over about 40 years, Chip can tell me if that's right or not, but about 40 years of knowing each other and going through ups and downs, arguments, great conversations, great times together, hard times together. Somehow the relationship has, over the years, not only lasted, but thrived. And we've become very, very deep. So it really is true that I've considered Trip my best friend for a long time, for pretty much those 40 years. And we're just going to be thinking about how does a long-term friendship stay long? And what kind of things go into the kind of relationships that God wants us to have with each other. And Trip and I haven't gotten perfect in our relationship, but we have a good one. And we just want to think about whatever elements we might have brought to the table under God's direction that have helped us have the kind of relationship we do have. And so I want Trip start with you by letting them know how you and I started our relationship, how we met in the first place. Give us a little history of that.
My wife and I were newly married in '79. We'd been married a couple of years and living in Canada. And after a year and a half, things had gotten so bad in that short time that we had separated. So we had been separated for 6 months after 2 years of marriage. And really, we're up against the wall. We were both believers. I certainly didn't want to live a divorce. My mom had divorced 5 times, so one of my promises to myself was that I wasn't going to do it. But there I was in a mess and didn't know what to do, and started seeing different counselors and talking to different people, and nothing seemed to make a difference. And it finally came to a point where a friend from the States sent one of Larry's early books that nobody reads anymore to me, called Second One, Effective Biblical Counseling, I think.
I thought it was the basic principles.
Pardon me?
I thought it was basic principles. Was it effective?
I think it was the second one, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, I read that book, and after having talked to all these people, it felt like they were basically asking me to change colors, just to try to volitionally do something different, which I was willing to try, but it never worked. And I read Larry's book, and I realized he was saying something different. I wasn't quite sure what it was, but it drew my attention. And my wife, having caught the fact that I was drawn to this book and something seemed positive, she actually contacted Larry. We didn't know who he was. We'd never heard of him before, except for the book, and explained our situation. And Larry wrote back and said, well, fly down. I often receive couples down for a week. You can fly down, get a motel, and see me an hour a day for a week, and I'd be glad to meet you. So my wife gave me an ultimatum, partly because when we were separated, when we got together, we had really good times together. So I think I was could have enjoyed that for a long time. And she basically said, we either do that or I'm going to consider you've bailed. So we flew down in the fall of '79 to Boca Raton, Florida, got a little hotel across from the sea, and saw you for actually a total, was it 4 hours, honey, or 5? 4? Because we went down with only 3 hours promised. And she said she didn't tell me that because she figured I wouldn't go. And then we got an extra hour when we got there. So we met as very messed up and very confused, and actually flying down, very friendly, enjoying each other, but very much feeling that that was our final trip together. And you were a dark-haired young man back then.
Long time ago.
A long time ago. And that was a major turning point for me, because somehow you did not do anything that most of the other counselors had tried to do. And you instead were able to talk to me and walk into my reality to help me realize what the reality was inside of me that was basically controlling me. I mean, I felt very unvolitional, even though I was a very volitional man. And so that week we saw you for 4 hours, and we ended up going back. I remember at the very last session, you said, what is your hope level at this point between 1 and 10? Or first you said, what was it coming in? And Judy said 1, and I cheated and said 0. And at the end, I think we both said something like 8.
Yeah,
we knew something had happened, and we weren't naive, but we flew back, and we saw you again a year later. Then we came down another year, and you said, you got to quit coming down because you're doing it for the beaches. You're doing well. Remember that?
I do remember that. Yeah, right.
And that's
relevant to coming down.
And obviously you weren't just trying to make money, you would just let us keep coming. But you actually announced that time that you were getting ready to move to Indiana and do a master's program.
Uh,
And one of the reasons that I ended up in your master's program, because we flew back to Canada, and all of a sudden, all these Christian couples were coming out of the word saying, we're on the edge too. What happened? What did he say? What do you, and I, at that point, I didn't know, but I did know that there was somebody on the earth that knew how to get inside where the real battle was. And so that's why I ended up going to your master's program.
Very clearly. And I remember too, that a number of couples from your area up in Canada did come down to see me. And I don't think I was particularly helpful to any of the couples that came down based on the fact that God had done a work in your life. And I'll tell you what the difference is. I'm thinking about this now, and I don't know if I thought of this until this moment. But I think that when you and Judy came down, just thinking about my relationship with you, very close to Judy as well, but what I was thinking about with you was you were one of the few that would let me in. You're one of the few that was eager to search the deeper regions of your messed up soul and your sinful soul and your dark soul and your screwed up soul and all that was kind of ugly and not right. You weren't afraid of going there. And most people are. And I really think that was kind of a beginning where I remember thinking, this is a guy that I've rather enjoyed talking with in a counseling way. And then when you joined the master's program, then we got to know each other even better. But then you recall how our relationship took another turn. You went from being my client, you became my student, you became an intern in my program. So from client to student to intern. And then I would say that it went to friend, and you know the story I'm going to tell. When I was speaking up in Boston, and you came down, you and Judy came down, Rachel and I were there, and I was speaking. It was my first time to speak to a huge crowd. I think it was 6,000 people. And I at a public, is that about right? 6,000 people?
Something like 12. I think it was huge.
Okay. But I remember, I was intimidated. I mean, I had done a fair amount of speaking even then, but never to a group that large. And I gave my talk to 12,000, whatever number it was. So we had breakfast the next morning and in the hotel. And you recall what you said to me. Do you recall the exact words you said to me after the meal was served and we're sitting there?
You said it so many times, I remember it now. Something, what made you get up there thinking you would be hated or something, or I don't know, something along those lines?
That's right on target. You said to me, Larry, why did you get up expecting to be hated by everybody? And I remember my defensive strategies were intact.
Oh, indeed.
My response internally was, hey, pal, I've been your psychologist. Don't try to mess with me. I know what I'm doing here. And I was scared because somebody was getting inside me and I wasn't all that eager for it at that moment. But after fighting you off a little bit and you wouldn't let me fight you off at the end of the breakfast, and this was when I think the relationship turned into a friendship. I remember at the end of the breakfast, I said, could we meet again tomorrow morning? And I really wanted to get to know you and let you get to know me. And I think that's been central to our relationship. We know each other in ways that we don't let everybody know us. I think it's important to be authentic, but there's a different level of authenticity between you and I, in spite of our very, very different backgrounds. What do you do with that?
Well, what do you mean? What do I do with it? The fact our backgrounds are so different?
The backgrounds are so different, but somehow our authenticity in the middle of different backgrounds got us down to what's common between us.
Yeah, and I think partly it's a desperateness. I mean, it's like when I was in Florida, I was open because I was desperate. I realized this is do or die. And I think for some darn reason, my whole life feels that way oftentimes. And I know that that's true for you too. We've talked about, the existential crises in the middle of the night and all this stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons we joined. Life is not a pleasant walk in the park, and there's a huge price to be paid, and there's a huge enemy within that we have to battle constantly. And I think that's where we meet. I mean, you came from the Leave It to Beaver perfect family. I came from a family with, five divorces and the mother who killed herself at 45, and but the same existential awareness. You've told me stories, watching your dad play tennis and stuff at times, that you were picking up stuff that made you existentially asking a lot of questions. So I think that's part of why we meet.
No, I think that's true. There was kind of an existential reality. And it seems to me that if there's going to be the kind of friendship that only the gospel makes possible, because a lot of folks have good friendships,
Yeah.
that can be enjoyed as much by unbelievers as by believers. So, what makes a Christian friendship, in fact, Christian? And I'm kind of wondering, I guess we put it this way before, but it's feeling a little bit fresh, that there really are existential crises in each of us in terms of desperation. What's the meaning of life? Who am I? Why am I not who I long to be? I don't know how to change. No relationship is as satisfying as I wish it were. I don't feel loved by God. I know He's there. I don't sense His presence. I mean, all those kind of questions and dark nights, that it seems to me that only when you enter into the deepest questions of human existence, and that's all I mean by existential, that you discover what's beneath your worst terror.
Mhm.
And one of your favorite phrases over the years that you've said to me 100 times is you talk about being, because your darkness has continued, as has mine.
Mhm.
Yesterday morning, I woke up and I wasn't sure why the dickens I wanted to get up in the slightest. I didn't have any urge to get up and do anything at all.
Relate to that.
It kind of felt pointless. But somehow in the middle of that, your phrase has been, when you read certain books and you read certain scriptures, that you talk about being buoyed up. And say something about that. That you're familiar with that phrase, aren't you? You've said it 100.
Yeah, I do say it, and I know what it means, and it's a result of something. It's not something I've never learned to cling to, but it's the result of walking a certain path. And I think part of what binds us together is that along the way, I can think of specific moments. Of course, you were way down the road from me. I mean, you were leading the class in the programs. I remember having visions of you with 50 students out there, and you were out there swimming, and we were all skiing in the back, having a really good time. But you'd paid a big price to be able to talk about the things you talk about. But along the way, I'll never forget, like one of the moments, I was an intern and we were walking somewhere outside. And I was talking probably about just my struggles and being defeated. And I remember you said, "You're really not very comfortable with your sin, are you?" And I
Mm.
remember as a good evangelical, my first response was, "I think that might be heretical," but I was desperate enough where I got past that and I realized what you were talking about. And you weren't saying it's no big deal, but you're saying that that is not the bottom line. That
Yeah.
does not define who you are. And I think phrases like that built where, one of the things that I think maybe the phrase that has changed me the most in my life is the one, I don't know if you borrowed it or came up with it, was that nothing transforms us like looking bad in the presence of love.
I love that phrase.
Well, and that's the gospel.
Yeah, it kind of is. It is the gospel, the thing. And the problem is we, like, I'm reading some good work about the first Adam, the second Adam. And the
Mhm.
first Adam, after he blew it and ate from the forbidden tree, God had to go looking for him. He ran away. He didn't want to own his sin. He didn't want to stand there naked and ashamed and discover that God is a God of grace. He wasn't willing to trust the God that loved him, and so he ran away. And that's the difference in the second Adam, because when he was made sin for our sake, he didn't run and hide when the soldiers came to get him. He was the one that stepped forward and said to them, "Who are you after?"
Mhm.
The exact reverse of the first Adam, who ran away and tried to hide. The second Adam, Jesus, as he, the perfect Son of God, now made sin for me, he says, "I'm going to step forward." And they asked, "Who do you want?" And when they said, "Jesus of Nazareth," he says, "That's me." As if to say, I'm going to own the fact that now God is going to make me sin, and I'm going to pay the price of all of that. I'm not going to run away from it. And that's supposed to be our model, because we're never going to pay the ultimate price for our sin. But the more I look bad, the more I'm going to understand the word grace.
Yeah,
And
and you discover the heart of, that sentence. It's very relational. Even the whole idea of the expulsive power of a new affection, which is another term you're into. It's not your term, but you introduced it to me.
yeah,
And it's not a thing, but it's a relationship. The affection for a person that sees you at your worst and somehow believes in you, is still excited. There's a smile at some level. And that just, to me, I'm going back to those basics more and more as I get older. I find it more and more desperately necessary, and still hard to believe that you could be so contradictory to what you're supposed to be. And he's somehow delighted in us, and knowing where he's going with us and what he's going to make of us. So, I mean, that to me is the lifeline.
and I think one of the things that has kept me feeling very close to you and wanting to continue to the relationship until we're with the Lord, obviously. Um, but I remember both of us have asked the question of each other a time or two, maybe a bunch of times, because we're so familiar with each other's deep struggles and crises and problems and worries and desperations and all that. And I can recall you saying to me, and I've said it to you as well, but you said to me, have you gotten past some of your struggles? And when I said no, you go, oh, I'm so relieved. Because
I'm always a little afraid you're going to get there and I'll never find out what it is. No, I don't believe it. I think the person that says that's got to be a liar. He's got blinders on, but
it's not untouched.
I think the battle seems to intensify. Not that I'm getting worse, but my sensitivity of what sin is, and it makes me more aware of it. And the more you want to please the Lord, the more it breaks your heart.
See, that's really crucial. The idea of that we're adding to the Lord's suffering every time we move away, because he's still suffering, and for us to move away from him for any reason, that I think that breaks his heart, as you just said it. That's hard for him. That's sorrowing for him.
Yeah, and you don't want to do it with the one person that's loved you perfectly, and you end up doing it. And that's kind of the idea. I've used the term that you can't always relate to sometimes, the idea of flipping them off.
Yeah.
I'll go to heck with you. I know I know where I can get what I need. I'm going over here.
Yeah. And I think, I don't want to get off on a little sermon thing here, but I think that's the essence of sin. I was meeting the other day with Kep and his family and Ken with his family, as Rachel and I were celebrating our 54th anniversary. And as we had the Lord's Supper together last Sunday morning, I remember starting it off, or it was afternoon actually, but I said, what's the one sin that everyone commits, that all of us commit? I'm not guilty of adultery. I'm not guilty of drunkenness. I'm not guilty of bank robbery. I'm not guilty of a lot of sins. So I guess I'm a good Christian, huh? But what's the one sin that we all commit? You know, John says, we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, the truth is not in us. And I think the one sin really comes from when Adam ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The only way he could be like God was not to become omnipotent or omnipresent or omniscient. The only way he could be like God was to make his own decisions about what's good and what's evil.
Here's how I'll find life on my terms. Yeah.
How it just seems when your phrase flipping them off, when you flip them off, you're saying, I think I know what's good for me right now. I know you think it's bad, God, but I think it's good. So the dickens with you. I got to trust my definition of good.
Yeah.
And that
you
feels
certainly don't seem like you're doing what I need right now, or I'd be feeling different. But that is the bottom line. It really is.
It really is, because God is so disappointing given our perverted understanding of what's good and bad.
Yeah.
And I think that's very, very strange. What do you do with the fact that you and I have had, a few minor skirmishes over our 40 years of friendship?
Yeah, I wrote that down too. I said we've had some very tense moments over the years, some not so far back. And the question it raised for me is, how do you think we've weathered them and not only stayed friends, but have become closer friends?
Well, let me just tell a quick story. I was speaking at a conference at Moody Bible and Founders Week, and you were there being with me and Rachel. And one night after I had spoken, I think, we were walking, finding a little restaurant to get something at 10 o'clock at night or whatever it was, and walking the streets of Chicago. And you and I got into a screaming match. You don't forget that, did you?
Oh, no, I never forget that. And we were both just yelling at each other, walking down the empty streets of Chicago at night. Our wives were kind of cowering behind us.
At the top of our lungs. And I think it was Judy who said to Rachel, oh my gosh, the friendship is going to end. And I can see why she would wonder about that at that moment, because I was mad at you and you were mad at me, and I knew I was right and you knew you were right. How did
it ended up being over something we probably couldn't even, something had to do with my weight or something. I don't remember, but
I have no idea what it was.
Yeah.
I remember, there's been a time or two like that, and sometimes they've been scary.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are talking to I don't know how many people right now about the fact that we're still very close friends, and we've had some pretty serious downs as well as a whole bunch of ups. How did downs? I remember Mary Beth said to me once, Larry, how important is it in order to develop a really deep relationship that you really get sideways with each other at times? What do you do with that? Because we've gotten sideways with each other, to use an old-fashioned phrase.
Yeah. Well, I can't imagine a relationship going towards the kind of depth that they're called to without that.
Why?
Well, because you're living at some surface level and you're not getting down to your, I don't know, each of your fleshes at some level. I mean, it just sounds like the way to do that is kind of to live above it and be kind of friendly and nice. But, and something hits me about the last one we had when I was down there. It was kind of a major blowout. I ended up weeping and I don't know what went on, but I couldn't tell you today, and I don't think you could either, what the cause was. I mean, it's not like we had to go fix it all up somehow, that we just kind of got up and assumed that we're moving ahead, and we were, you know, you remember that?
I can recall where you were sitting, and I can recall where I was sitting here in my home in Charlotte. And I remember at some point just thinking, our relationship is in shambles. I'm not very attracted to you right now in the slightest as a friend. You're not terribly attracted to me as a friend. And even though that was there, I really, and I think this is very honest, I didn't think that this is the end of our friendship.
Yeah.
I was pretty confident that it wasn't, but why? Because of years of being exposed in the front of each other and still being valued and stayed with me. And I mean, I can't imagine anything that I could say to you that would cause you to turn away from me.
I believe that's true. And it's like, it's mutual.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah. And how that happens, maybe that's just the fruit of a relationship where we have seen each other at our worst. We've received and offered grace. And I mean, yeah, I feel like the first fight was the scarier one because we didn't have the background. We've had a few now. So yeah, I don't know. But I think that is part of I'd really question somebody, even a couple that says, oh, we have a great marriage. We've never really fought. I just think, anyway, maybe that's the way it's supposed to be for better people than we.
I was doing a marriage seminar. This is a long time ago. And an older couple, now that I'm old, this couple was probably in their 50s and they were older to me then. The couple came to me, maybe they were in their late 50s. And I was doing a marriage conference and talking about the fact that husbands and wives struggle with each other. And he came up and with a very warm smile said, oh, Dr. Crabb, we've been married now for 30 years and we've never had a fight. And we've never had anything other than closeness. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of in a, maybe my wise guy kind of mood at the time, because what I said to him was, tell me how long you went into separate bedrooms. How long ago you went? And he said, 2 years into our marriage.
Oh, boy.
I said, so you're keeping your distance and that's how you don't have any tension. And he looked at me and he said, that's kind of true. Mm-hmm. And I said, you don't have a marriage. You cannot say that you have a marriage. You have at best your roommates who reasonably well get along from a distance. And if you call that marriage, you miss the entire point of marriage. Move into the bedrooms, not just for sexual relations, but move into the bedrooms for soul intimacy. Be together in the one room that nobody else is allowed in but you and your wife, and let that be a symbol of intimacy. And then you'll discover that there's tensions, there's frustrations, there's disappointments. And then you discover that you don't have to be in love, you have to love. Yeah. And that's a very different concept, thanks to C.S. Lewis.
Mm-hmm. Very different. I have a question kind of for you. I don't know. I mean, as we're both getting older, we kind of joke because we're both eager to move into the main act of what we're called to. The verse you quote most often, or not most often, but very often, is that if this is all there is, then this, you know, if this is, I can't quote it, but I put it in my words.
Our only hope is in Christ. And in this life, if our only hope is Christ, we're of all people most to be pitied.
Yeah. And so we kind of talk about who gets to go first.
Yeah.
And do you ever think about it? I sometimes think about, you know, if you go first, what that would be like. And I mean, it's not, we could hang around a long time, but you've got a bit of a head start on me.
A couple. How old are you now? You're 67?
70 in January.
You'll be 70 in January?
Yeah, you're 76, aren't you?
Yeah, but not yet, but I will be in about 3 weeks. Okay. 4 weeks, maybe. Yeah, I think that's a very fair question. Well, you know, I just came out with a book called Waiting for Heaven, that larger story published. And I think what I'm getting a little bit more in touch with, because one of the people that works with Larger Story, a woman named Carlene, had a very wise insight talking about waiting for heaven. as we now face the fact that we're going to die, and a very solid, strong friendship is going to no longer be available to the one who's remaining. And she said to me, you need to maybe share a little bit about why going to heaven is so attractive. A lot of us either just spiritualize it and think we're going to sit at the feet of Jesus. He's going to be teaching us for eternity. That, frankly, I guess it's supposed to excite me, but it doesn't really. And I wrote a little article at the end of the book on Waiting for Heaven as to what is attractive about heaven. And the idea that all the talents that have been misused down here are going to be given full expression when we're with the Lord. And whether it's a Beethoven or a Mozart or some classic pianist who knew the Lord, he's probably going to create some new music. We're going to go to a concert on a Saturday night. And you start thinking about everything in this life that's good, triple it to infinity and take away everything that's problematic. And when I start thinking about heaven, my thought is that even beats my relationship with Tripp.
I hope so. Yeah.
Makes me feel a little bit. If I got word that you died, I would be, I'm not sure if the word is devastated, but I'd be very, 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 very sad. It means I can't talk to you anymore. It means I can't get on the phone with you. We can't get together and visit. And I really, really would miss that. Now, I have a couple other friends, but you're one that knows me really as nobody else really does, thanks to the depth of our relationship and the years that we have. So I do think about that some, but Waiting for Heaven helps me kind of accept that fact, as well as my wife's death.
Yeah, sure. That's the same thing.
Same
Living
thing.
after it. And I also, my mind strangely goes, this may be a pressure thing, but I don't know if I'd be able to honor you like I'd like to in the context. Would I be able to, put my heart out there in a way that demonstrated the kind of man you are and what I think of you? So.
Chip, I really appreciate that. And let me just add this right now, because it's just occurring to me now. I think I've told you this before several times, but we do schools of spiritual direction together many, many times. I've done more than 70 of them, and Tripp has been a part of probably half of them, if not more. And at the end of the thing, we always have a banquet where the students get up and share how the Lord has been speaking through them during that week. And it's been a very important time. A lot of good things were said. But the first time you said this, and you said it several other times, and you almost alluded to it earlier in this little conversation, but you got up at one conversation at Glen Eyrie, or one banquet, and I can recall pretty close to the words, you got teary, you got emotional, and you said with emotion, and this will sound self-serving, but let me tell you what it did. It touched my soul. You said, I don't know if any of us understand the price that Larry pays to lead us as he does. And I began to cry. And I think that's one of the things about our relationship. You've spoken words of life into me. I've spoken a couple of words of life into you, and words that go very, very deep, partly because you know me and you know what I struggle with, and I know you, and I know what you struggle with, and there's nothing in me that wants to ever give up on you. And that's, of course, centrally because of Christ, but also because you're an incredibly honest man. You don't run away from what I can tell. I'm sure that this is an overstatement, but there's no reality that you run from. If you and Judy are not getting along, you don't run from it. You don't smooth it over and say, oh, we'll have dinner tonight, we'll be fine. Might be good to go out to dinner with her, but you're not going to just run away from the fact that things are tense at the moment. I've been tense with Rachel, you've been tense with Judy. I don't want to run from the fact. I don't want to pretend our marriage is every minute just wonderful and glorious. And I don't want to pretend that here I write all these books and I go around lecture and I'm doing a webinar now. And I've often said that if people really knew what I was like, I wonder how many of them would read my books. And I'd like to think more should at that point.
I would think so too. The ones that wouldn't I think are wrong and missing something. But.
So that sentence that you said to me, you've said it several other times at the banquets, but that was the time that really struck me. So speaking life into each other is one part of our long-term friendship, I think.
And which comes out of seeing the deep battle and what God is producing in each other through it. I mean, seeing the gold that's coming out. So we get to see both sides, what's the heights and those words, the profounders. Anyway,
Yeah.
remember what do you call them? The heights and the
Heights,
depths of the gospel.
the heights and the depths, whatever,
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of the old spiritual directors talks about consolation, desolation. That
Mhm.
kind of gives us moments of excitement and joy and his presence and his reality, and moments of desolation where we just feel like the night is so dark we don't even know if he exists anymore.
Yeah. It's
And,
funny, I just had a big flash, and it ties into everything we've just talked about, is that I think one of the biggest impacts that generally that my friendship with you, and perhaps one of the attractions to the friendship because of that, is that knowing you were messed up and seeing how you live, it made me know it was possible.
ah,
That you can be messed up, it doesn't disqualify you, it can even become a springboard.
yeah,
But that is a big deal for me to know who you are. If I didn't know you, I could think you were, but knowing who you are and seeing where God is taking you and what he's doing makes it all the more beautiful.
no, I appreciate that because I know who I am, I think, to some significant degree.
Yeah.
There are some mornings, and I'm talking about currently, not 20 years ago, there's some mornings knowing what's going on in me when I wake up at 4. As I've often said, probably on one of these webinars before, I've probably said this, but if you were to be able to hear, to tape record what goes on in my mind for an hour, 2 hours, from 4 in the morning till 6 when I can't sleep and I'm just wide awake and miserable, you would wonder if I've ever met Jesus. You would wonder if I know the Lord. Um, but it usually kind of comes to a point where, with all the desolation, to use that word again, my thought is there anything is there any reason to get up? And I always come to the point of, well, yeah, there is. Am I feeling it now? No, I'm not. Do I believe it? Yeah. What is it? Well, there is a kingdom that is near, not fully realized, and I can be a part of it today. And I can get up and do something that pleases the Lord and reflects the fact that I am a Christian, whether it's a simple little way of being especially nice to Rachel, or whether it's
Mhm.
just being more responsible and getting my bills paid today is putting them off because I'm kind of irritated about it.
Or like you've often taught me, empty the dishwasher. Could be that simple.
Yeah, it can be that simple.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what the thought that's coming to my mind at the moment. You talk about the fact that we have struggles, and that's been a real basis um, for meaningful connection at the level of soul. I would guess, I don't know how many people are listening to all this, but I would guess that some of the folks, maybe a lot of them, who are listening, talking, saying, well, these guys are screwed up in ways I'm not.
Mhm.
They're talking about struggles I just don't have. What do you do with that? If they were to say, well, Trip, I respect you and Larry for being honest about your struggles, but I'm honest about mine, and they're pretty minor compared to what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I imagine that's true. I don't think everybody has the same kinds of struggles. I used to hate my struggles. I used to feel like I'd been cursed somehow. But
Yeah,
I'm starting to realize now that they're a blessing, that God has used them in really big ways to make me need him. So I'm not jealous of people who somehow seem to live above the fray.
yeah,
And I don't really know theologically whether it's normal that some do and some don't. I really think that if we get in touch, because we're all contradictory, maybe
yeah.
not the same blatant ways, but I like to think everybody should be struggling at a very similar level. Of course, that's maybe me just casting, you know, my situation onto them. Because if you're not desperate, you know, I don't know. The Pharisees didn't seem desperate. They
Yeah.
seem to have things well in hand. So I don't know. I don't hate my struggles anymore. I don't like them. I can't wait till they be over with. But I see God doing what he's doing to draw me.
They're useful struggles. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think that, the person that says that, well, I just don't struggle like you guys seem to, I don't wish particular struggles on anybody.
No.
And I think are people that don't have certain kind of struggles, and I don't have certain kind of struggles that some other people that I know have. I don't have struggles with a bad marriage. I really don't. I've got a good marriage. I love my wife. I don't have that struggle. And some people, of course, have that struggle. And to be very real, I've never had to experience it quite like many people. But I would say this, that um, unless we get a clear understanding that sin is far more than the obvious big things.
Yeah.
I mean, adultery or whatever. pornography or whatever. I mean, those are sinful, obviously. And a lot of people don't have that struggle. I've never watched pornography in my life, partly because I don't know how to use a computer, but I'd like to think there's more to it than that. But there's something in the core of my soul that's beneath whatever struggles I have that is true of every other Christian. The one sin that everybody commits, and that is the wrestling against, I want this because I think it's good, and therefore I'm assuming God will give it to me because he's a good God. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a terrible philosophy. Mm-hmm. You know, I would like to be totally free of cancer. I'm not totally free of cancer. Is that a good to be free of cancer? Well, of course it's a good to be free of cancer. But apparently there's a greater good that God can use through my cancer without curing me of it. If my cancer was the worst evil in my life, he'd be taking care of it this moment. But it's not the worst evil in my life. And I just think it's important to understand that Satan, what he hates the most is the cross. And the only way to get our minds off the cross is to weaken our view of sin. And that's what I think is happening for people that are able to say, well, I don't really have any struggles. Yeah, you do. You've got a sin struggle. It doesn't mean that you're robbing banks, but it means that you're really trying to live your life according to your understanding of what is really good and what is really evil. And his thoughts are so far above ours that we've got to understand that he defines good very differently than we do. Seems to me that's the case, at least.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Well, that's 40 minutes.
Well, okay, yeah, I guess that's 40 minutes, so maybe we can...
Anything else you want to talk about, or?
No, I'm sure we could go on for a while. We normally do, but Cap, yeah. I see you on the screen there. What are we doing now? We can do whatever you like.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions that came in that I think would be really interesting to ask. One of the questions is, you guys have been friends for so long and you've been through some tough times. What sustained your friendship through those difficult times?
Well, I guess we've talked around that question and have given a bunch of thoughts about it, but maybe haven't narrowed it down to a clear sentence. What sustained us through that time?
In the friendship, or
the friendship.
Sustain the friendship, yeah. How do you guys maintain friends? I had a buddy the other day. We were chatting about political things, and I have a few political opinions, as most people know, but I don't really hold to them super strongly. And at this point now, you don't have lunch with me anymore because I had a different political position than he has, and I thought, if people allow that kind of friendship to just wither because of differences or even more significant tensions like you guys have experienced, how do you work through those as friends and maintain that friendship? And even what you said, Tripp, was interesting. It's become deeper. It's become better. It's become more solid, where there's nothing that you guys think you can say to each other that would end friendship.
Yeah, I just have a flash.
Similar opinions.
Yeah, my flash is it kind of goes back to marriage. I used to hate fights. My wife hated them. When we first got married, if there was a conflict, she'd be having to get her bag out and start packing it. I said, "Where are you going?" She even did that once when we were in Florida and knew nobody down there. I said, "Where are you going?" But anyway, that's not to make fun of her. It's just that fighting with your spouse isn't fun. But I started realizing over the years that through those times, we drew closer. Yeah. And ended up seeing where we were both really at, because things came out you wouldn't say otherwise. And then you realize there's a certain, and this would apply to my relationship with you, Larry, is that in spite of all the stuff that can happen, I know you love me. The track record is there. Yeah. I don't panic, and I don't like it when we have conflicts. Nobody does, but I don't know. I think just that over time, it's become proves a bond.
And I would say two things that are pretty much repeating what you just said. But when I think of what sustains a long-term friendship through all the ups and downs, I think it boils down to the word hope. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Tripp and I do differ in certain political things. When we all get to heaven, he'll realize he was wrong and he'll come apologize to me. But until then, he's going to hold to his position. But the hope is not that he's going to change his position or I'm going to change mine. But the hope is that there's something beneath that unites us that's far more important ultimately than our political differences or any other differences we have. Pardon, Tripp?
It could be theological or political or, yeah.
Yeah, it could be theological. Sure, there's things that we differ on, and but the real hope is that there's something deeper that unites, and then secondly, and maybe it's the same thing in different words, but I have the hope that because of what is inside Tripp that he's aware of, and what is inside me that I'm aware of, we both believe that the gospel does not end with justification. The gospel opens the door to real life through justification, and real life is learning to love like Jesus. And if he could love Peter, I figure I should be able to love Tripp, and he ought to be able to love me with the love of Jesus. So there's hope that love doesn't have to end when there's differences. Love has an opportunity to show off what God is really like. Kept, what your mother likes to say all the time, that our job is to make God look good. Mm. And when there's a difference, when Tripp and I have a difference about something, whether it's political or religious or Christian or whatever, that to make God look good, in my mind, is to put the love of Jesus on display by saying, when we differ, your value isn't diminished a bit. Mm. And my love for you and my hope for God to continue working with you. That was take it as last week, wasn't it?
Yeah, right. I think that was like in the early 80s, or it was after the program, and that's your house in Colorado, one of them, isn't it? In Denver.
Yes, I think that is. My goodness gracious sakes alive.
We had broad shoulders in those days.
Yeah, we still do. I used to have a great
That's a great picture.
All behind me. So that's our response to that question. Cap, yeah. What have we said, but I'll cut off there. Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple, actually. I would love for you, Dad, to unpack a little bit of what you talked to us about this last Sunday for the family devotional that we had. It was very profound and has left me thinking a lot. And I actually talked to the guys that we were playing with this afternoon before this webinar happened about that, and you could see their minds just going and thinking through that. And you opened it up by, what is the one sin that we're all guilty of?
Yeah.
You've never killed anybody. There's different things that you haven't done, but what's the one sin that all of us throughout the history of time are guilty of that required Jesus to go to the cross to pay for that?
That's just an incredibly important question. I met with Jimmy Callum, one of my other close friends, down here for breakfast this morning, and he was saying that he was raised in a Christian culture, evangelical Christian culture, where if you didn't do all the bad things, then you were walking with Jesus and doing just fine. And you didn't have any basis for repentance because you haven't committed adultery, you're not watching pornography, you're not robbing banks, you're not cheating the income tax. And he said, that's just a very shallow view of the Christian life, a shallow view of sin. And what I talked about, and I'm going to be careful not to take 2.5 hours to talk about this, but just the idea that the one sin that we all commit, I mean, I think, Tripp, you and I alluded to it already in our little conversation here, is the sin that got the whole human race off to a bad start. The first Adam ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil because the serpent tempted Eve, she gave in, and then she gave the fruit to Adam and he ate it. And the sin that they committed and let's just talk about Adam here, the sin that Adam committed, representing all of human beings, and the word Adam means humanity, was the sin of robbing from God the responsibility to discern what is good and what is evil. I will now decide what is good for me and expect God to cooperate. I will decide what is evil and expect God to protect me from it. And that's the ultimate sin. And that's the sin that the first Adam committed, that I commit every day. That there's something in me that very naturally, because the sin nature is still within me, I got it from Adam, the first Adam, that I really have to take the position every time that that I move in the wrong direction, I spend money that I don't have, I eat food that I shouldn't eat, whatever it might be. It's a way of saying, well, I think this is good for me right now. I need this. Therefore, whatever it is justified because I think it's good. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to get close to that person because they might hurt me. Well, that would be evil if they hurt me. So I'm going to organize my life around my understanding of what is evil. And God's up there saying, you've missed the whole point. I know what is good, you don't. I know what is evil, you don't. Pattern your life according to my understanding of what is good and evil, because you don't know what you're talking about. And I think that's the weight that Jesus bore on the cross. And he just handled it so differently than Adam. And I think I said this briefly at our Sunday morning time, that when Adam sinned, he ran away from God. He didn't want to own his sin. God had to come chasing after him. Adam, where are you? When Jesus was being made sin, was he about to be made sin in the garden, and the soldiers came to take him, he didn't grab his friends and run away. He walked up to them. It says he stepped forward toward the soldiers who were going to beat him up and nail him to a cross eventually. And he said, who are you after? He started the conversation. Adam ran away. And the soldier said, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And he said, I'm the one you want. And then he said, let my friends go. I'm going to bear the weight. They should go to the cross and die, but I'm going to go take their place. I deserve the punishment. And Adam disowned his sin. Eve, did you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Well, yeah, I did, God, because the serpent tricked me. Well, Adam, how about you? Well, you gave me Eve, and she's the one that got me into the trouble here. So they refused to own their sin of deciding what is good and what is evil. And that was the essential point that I made. And that should be elaborated a lot more, but that's the short version of it. Is that pretty much what I said the other morning?
It really was, and you detailed it well, and just really unpacked it in a way that I think we need to add a couple chapters to the Silence of Adam, which is now titled Men of Courage, because it really it's got me thinking of what does it mean for me to try to put myself in God's position, and that's the ultimate sin.
I will be like God.
Yep.
And what did Jesus die for? He didn't die because of what he said about the temple. He said, I'm going to take the temple down and build up my own hands. And they charged him with that, but they couldn't find any witnesses to support the allegation, to agree with what he said. But what they did crucify him for was when the high priest said, do you claim that you're the son of the living God? And Jesus said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I am. And he was crucified because he was trying to be like God. Well, that's what I do crucifixion for trying to be like God. And he took that weight. He was God, but he was accused of the sin that I most seriously committed. So God steered the whole arrest process so that Jesus died for the ultimate sin that we all commit every day. And
So I was that little time that we had as a family on Sunday morning, Dad, was very important for all of us, and we've chatted a bunch about it since that time, just a day and a half ago. And I would love to expose some of the people watching today to some of that information, because I think it's just too important to not get out there.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping to do some other webinar sermons, maybe on the 7 churches, because I think the Lord comes down and says, folks, you're trying hard and you're wrong. Let me tell you about it.
Yeah.
And, of the 7 churches, only 2 did he not rebuke. 5 he did rebuke. And I wonder if the churches, if we understand what the 7 churches where they failed, we might understand where we failed as well. And I think it all comes down to trying to be like God and making up our own minds about what's most important, what's the best, and arranging our lives according to that, as opposed to saying, God, what's your best? And that takes some discernment. We have the scripture to guide us and the Spirit to guide us. But in the absence of that, we're sinning every day.
Yeah. Tripp, tell me, what's been the most difficult part of the friendship that you've had with Larry?
Getting used to how wonderful I am.
Pardon?
Getting used to how wonderful I am.
Yeah, that's it.
You nailed it right on the head, Dad. Perfect.
Right there. And you can't cross him. I don't know. There's no main point. I don't think it's overall been good, with a few hard moments here that became good in retrospect. So
yeah,
it's amazing.
About that question for you, Pop.
Ask it one more time so make sure I get it right. What's
been the hardest piece about working about the relationship that you have with Tripp that's been now several decades old?
I would say that one of the ways that I become very aware that I fail Tripp, and I think I become aware of how I fail Tripp because I'm more able to see how he's failed me. And when I see how he's failed me, and when it's legitimate, and I'm not just being critical, then I become aware of, I do that too. And what it is, I think that 90% of the time, Trip listens very well. He wants to hear what I'm saying. He wants to explore me. He wants to be curious. Sometimes, as I share something, he'll come up with a quick answer because he has a very quick mind, and I won't have felt heard. I wanted to be heard a little more before he moved toward me in good ways, and I've done the same thing to Trip, and I think that's been a little pattern 5% of the time in our conversations, but when it's there, I feel that I get exposed, that whatever I think I'm disappointed in Trip in this particular moment, but I'll remember, Trip, you won't remember this, back in when I lived in Denver, you and I had a long conversation, and I was sharing some stuff, and you weren't really listening well to me, and I felt very missed, and the conversation ended, and I just felt very missed and very alone. Phone rang, and 10 minutes later, and it was you, and you said, "Larry, I think I just missed you." That meant the world to me. Do you remember that at all?
I think I kind of remember where I was when that happened. Yeah.
Yeah, and that just felt, that takes something hard and turns it into something that's beautiful. Because Chip does not want to miss me. I do not want to miss him. Do we miss each other? Of course. We haven't been glorified yet. What do you expect? But that happens sometimes.
I just think it's so neat for people to see the example of two, I was going to say old men, but that wouldn't be very kind. Older men, I guess, who have endured,
I think the word is mature.
relationships. And the friendship has gotten deeper. And I've had it's been a real privilege for me to get a chance to kind of be the fly on the wall in your relationship and see how some of this has worked. And that's been really, really important for me with some of the relationships that I have. My best friend is the same thing. I don't think there's anything he could say to me that would make me want to just dismiss him, or I'm no longer your friend, or any of those kind of things. I just don't think that's possible. But to see you guys and Dad, quite frankly, to see a lot of the relationships that you've had and have with a lot of people, that has really been such a great example for me in what it means to stay engaged, to stay involved, to stay leaning in. You're not giving up on someone, and I think that example is so important today for people to see, because it's so easy for us all today just to say, "I'm out.
Yep.
I don't like you anymore, Trip, and I don't want to talk to you anymore." And that's just so self-centered, and I think that's where, again, that goes into the ultimate, what you've been talking about, Dad, in terms of the sin is, I want to make that decision.
Yeah.
To be the one in charge. God, I don't want you in charge. And it's what you've said is you're raising your fist in God's face, saying, I'm the one in charge, not you. And that's the sin that Jesus went to the cross to pay for us, as well as all of the other ones. But that was the essential.
The essential. And I remember telling me that it's so wrong to discard anybody.
Yeah.
You said that, to give up on somebody. And to put it very obviously, the reason it's wrong to discard somebody is God doesn't do that. He's the hound of heaven who's pursuing everybody. Now the day will come, and the eternal judgment, when there'll be people that will be without God forever. Yeah. And that's a tragedy that's hard even to imagine. I don't want to discard anybody now while the door is still open. Whether it's a believer who I know is going to heaven, like Trip and I know we're both going to heaven, but I just can't imagine, as we said earlier, that Trip could do anything that would make me say, I'm done with you, pal. I just wouldn't. Same with you, Kep, or with Kenny. There's nothing you could say that would make me want to say, I wish you weren't my son. I couldn't possibly say that.
We feel that, Dad, and we know that, and that's very reassuring for us, and my children to feel that as well.
Of course.
Well, as we get ready to wrap up, you two, is there anything else you want to say to the group of people that we've got here as we get ready to close?
Trip, what you got?
I don't have much to say, but thanks for sitting around and listening to us.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. If I had to, I don't have any great closing sentence, but I would say this. I've been to the number of times at the Billy Graham Training Center, and the one big picture of Billy where they have one of his quotes that as I walk down the steps to my room, I always see this word, and I can't quote it perfectly, but Billy Graham once said that nobody can live without hope. Hope is to the human soul what air is to the human lung. And I just don't want anybody to give up hope. Even if your spouse leaves you, if your child rebels against you and hates you, if life goes south in the biggest way, is there any hope? Well, maybe not for that relationship. It may never materialize. That's possible. But you always have a hope that God can do his good work in you and through you for his purposes. And your ultimate hope is heaven's going to make sense out of everything. And then there's going to be joy no matter what happened down here. And then we're going to be able to say it was worth it all, our efforts to put the Lord on display by how we relate to others. And that's what Chip and I want to do. And we've been doing reasonably well, never perfectly, but staying with it.
Well, thank you guys so much. Trip, thanks for joining us today. We have to do this again. I've said to Dad, it's so fun. I look forward to these webinars because I get a chance to see him. I'm actually in North Carolina now. People probably think I'm at Augusta because I'm using my brother's computer with the Augusta hole behind me here, but I'm actually in North Carolina. And so I've got a chance to spend a little time with Mom and Dad this week, which was outstanding. And we've got my whole family here, and that's been just a real blessing for all of us. So thank you guys for joining us today. A couple things real quickly as we get ready to close. You heard Larry mention we've been doing remote Bible teaching recently. We did this all during the coronavirus quarantine time. And I think we have convinced or persuaded Larry to continue doing that. You heard him allude to the fact that he's going to be doing the 7 churches of Revelation, and we will let you know when that Bible series is going to begin. Also, just to let everyone know, and I'm sure all of you have heard this before, but we've got Larry's latest book coming out, Waiting for Heaven, Freedom from the Incurable Addiction to Self. The release date is on July 14th, but we are still offering a pre-release discount for all of you folks. So if you're interested in that, please go to largerstory.com and check out our website and pre-order Dad's next book, Waiting for Heaven, which I think is probably as important as it's ever been, given where we are now as a world. And I think that what's happening now has really allowed my family to realize this isn't our home. We're just passing through. And that's been something that we've really tried to cling to. And Dad, your book has put a mark on my life that will never change. It's been incredible. So I'd encourage all of you to get the book. I think it's one of Larry's best, and most people who have read it to this point would say that it's really kind of the second or the ending piece to the book Inside Out. A little bit of that comes through in that. So would encourage you all to do that. And thank you everybody for spending this hour with us today. Trip, great to see you. Please say hi to Judy for all of us. And hopefully we'll get to see you face to face and hug your neck sometime soon, my man.
Good.
It's good to see you. And Dad, I love you too. And I'm so grateful for you being willing to do these webinars, even though you're not the computer guy, but I think we're tricking everybody. Everybody thinks you are the computer guy now. So you're Mr. Zoom. What's that?
Maintain the illusion.
Thank you everybody for joining us. We'll see you next month, and be looking for the remote Bible series on the 7 churches of Revelation. Have a great weekend, guys.